We would like to continue our program by words from two colleagues of Stan. One is Dr. Linda Goff, and after her words, we'll hear from Dr. Isabelle Medina Sandoval.
I had to make sure there was something I could step up on, being so short. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, members and friends of the Santa Fe Jewish Book Council, and thank you, Ron Hart, and others very much for inviting me to present a few remarks in honor of Stan Hordes today. It's a very emotional time. For me, it's an honor to be asked to speak about a friend and colleague of 46 years. Yikes. As Stan recently said to me, of all the folks who will be there, you've known me the longest and have stories to tell. I made him an offer, and the response, I don't think I'll go into. It's off the record. I know. Let me share a few factoids with you about both Stan and Helen that some of you may or may not be aware of. First, did you know that they were high school sweethearts and attended the University of Maryland together as undergrads? Second, according to Helen, she'd get a call from Stan and others while she was living in the dorms, asking if she was up for a game of hearts. She said, I'd whip out the rollers and say, be there in 5. Did you also know that Stan was at one time the youngest member of the Washington Redskins football marching band? That's a story I'm not sure he wanted out. You might ask him sometime to sing the fight song, for old DC. Now that baseball has finally come to DC, they are true Nats fans. And they're also always up for an Isotopes game. Some of you here today have also heard me say a few things that I can blame on Stan. Helen, you're off the hook. As a UNM grad student, and at a grad student party in the fall of 1971, when we all arrived in Albuquerque, Stan introduced me to a fellow grad student by the name of Ed Goff. And it was 10-cent beer night, and you can just imagine the rest. And as they say, no pun intended, the rest indeed became history. When Ed and I retired to Santa Fe in 2012, Stan encouraged me to join the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society and attend the Taos Fall Conference, where I met both Naomi Sandweiss and Dorothy Anston, who were then current and immediate past presidents, and who in turn did a little arm twisting and said, would you join a committee? And again, the rest became history. However, on a more serious note, Stan and I were graduate students in 2 colonial Latin American history seminars with Dr. Troy Floyd, one of the best professors, I would argue, we had together at UNM. Troy Floyd was not only a scholar in his own right, but also a gentleman in the truest sense in how he interacted with students, both personally and professionally. It was always Mr. Hordes or Miss So-and-so, long before the days of Ms. Even in those early graduate student days, Stan immediately impressed me as a serious scholar in the making. And at times, he could be a little intimidating. Sorry, Stan. I was the outlier in the group, a pre-Columbian art and archaeologist, and we were about 6 altogether, and I the only non-historian in those seminars, as I recall. Stan was very focused and passionate about history and committed to serious scholarship, particularly when it came dealing with primary sources and archival documents. He knew then that what he wanted to achieve as a colonial Latin American historian. He also recognized early on, in those early days, that he would have to move on to pursue his PhD and study with one of the most eminent Latin American colonial historians of the time, Dr. Richard Greenleaf at Tulane University. While Stan and Helen moved on to New Orleans, we, Ed and I, moved on to St. Louis for PhD programs. We kept in touch and visited with them in the Big Easy. And I recall having some wonderful meals together, including one along Lake Pontchartrain. Not too long after that, Stan visited us in London, our first overseas assignment with the State Department. We had had our first child, Sarah, there, and I recall Stan saying to me, "It's okay, Linda, you'll survive the first child challenges and hiccups." By then, their son Paul had been born, and Stan was on his way to Madrid and Seville, I believe, to conduct research in various libraries and archives. Over the following years, we remained in contact off and on, and we were able to visit when we were able to visit New Mexico and Santa Fe. We always met up with Stan and Helen and the children. In fact, it was on one of those trips that Stan introduced us to one of his favorite haunts, the Tecolote Cafe on Cerrillos Road. The wait staff knew him well and always had the best table ready for us. Hanging out with a VIP never hurts. I'd also like to say a few words about Helen. As the saying goes, behind every successful man, there's a strong woman. From my observations throughout those graduate student years and beyond, when Stan was conducting his research, Helen was his #1 cheerleader and supporter who worked with Stan on his projects in a variety of ways. Over the years, that has not changed, as life has presented its challenges for them. And as a longtime friend, thank you, Helen. Finally, I'd like to comment on what Stan has meant in the lives of many New Mexican members of the Hispanic community who have been making their personal journeys of discovery about their Jewish roots, reaching back many generations. Stan has helped open doors to people that have changed their lives. I am in constant awe with the love and affection with which people speak about Stan for the assistance and support he has lent to people, a true mitzvah. Finally, it goes without saying that you deserve a lot of credit for your tireless work to help establish the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society and the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, both organizations that wouldn't exist without your dedication and vision. We owe you a large and great deal of thanks. Mazel tov today. Thank you.
I would like now to invite Dr. Isabelle Medina Sandoval to say her words of congratulation.
It's so nice to have this extra step because we're all short people. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here this afternoon. And Stan, it's a real honor to be speaking today. I would like to speak today about identity from the Anusi voice. And this is so important because you've heard from scholars and you've heard from my dear friend Linda Goff, but I would like to talk as a descendant of the Anusim from New Mexico. As a child, I always questioned my identity. I would listen to my parents speak in beautiful Spanish, and I would wonder on Friday nights why they were drinking kosher wine. It never sunk in. So I always wondered about that in school, about identity. Who am I? Where am I going? And in 1974, as I graduated from the University of New Mexico with a major in Spanish, I found a book called The Origins of New Mexico Families, written by Angelico Chavez. And even though I was a Spanish major, I started reading, oh, this family comes from a Marrano family. My goodness, I was starting to question. Now I'm finding out that we have Jewish roots. So that made me stop and think. Then in 1992, Stan, that was the first time I heard you speak in Colorado Springs. And then the lights went off. I could understand the connections to New Mexico, to families, and how the historical piece of colonial families came to New Mexico. And that really ignited many questions for me. So at that point, I was engaged in academic research. I started looking more at archives, and I had already done extensive genealogy work. And then I also looked at family interviews. And I would just say that within that, there were family secrets that came out. Stan, I can never thank you for the interviews I conducted with some of my family, with my sisters, and it was just wonderful. But at the same time, it was like stepping on eggshells because within the family, there are certain secrets you don't share. And within the family, you don't say things that are anti-Catholic, anti-Protestant, because it is a taboo. So that was interesting. And then I started looking more at New Mexico history because I'm not an historian, but I was very interested in this. And this really started me looking at doing some personal writing because by definition, I'm a retired educator, so I love the education field, but I felt a huge gap. Things that have not been taught in school and are still not taught in school today, and it comes back to who am I and what is my identity? I would say that with the information you shared, Stan, that it has not all been a bed of roses because within that, you find different people, different groups, Jewish scholars, Hispano scholars, other people who did not like the tension that was created by people having a Jewish identity. They did not like this. And it has not all, and even today I've seen several things come out in the last month, again, looking at why do we say that there are people who have a crypto-Jewish background in New Mexico? But I look at Psalm 133:1. Behold, how good and how pleasant is it when God's people dwell in unity. And Stan, that's what you have done today. You have brought that together. And I consider you to be a person who has truly impacted me because of your objectivity and your genuine concern. The academic research you have done with crypto Jews in New Mexico is outstanding and has impacted many of us. I think the part is that where we value the family relationships, and this is a fragile, very, very fragile situation. Stan, you have shared with me some of the interviews or talked about a few people you interviewed who were my own family members. So later on, I thought, my goodness, you mean my cousin who is a devout Catholic all of a sudden now is telling Stan about our Jewish past? So when I talked to my family about this, again, he tells me so many things. I can't tell you how many of my cousins have come and told me this. And these are people who all have a minimum of a master's degree and higher degrees with graduate education. But most of all, Stan, what has been the best to me has been the conversations that I shared with my father and my sisters. When we talk about not just the archival work, but we look at the traditions, it's fantastic to know that there has been a conversation and generational traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation. Most of all, when I look at that puzzle piece, and I call it the invisible puzzle, I appreciate the way you have valued me, Stan. And I know that there are many people here today that you have also done the very same thing because you are so objective. You have never infringed on family or swayed anyone to look at a Jewish conversion. And that is so important that that objectivity is there. And although this happened like 25 years ago, since that time, Stan and I have become friends. I've been able to know his beautiful wife, Helen. I remember, Stan, when we talked, we had no grandchildren. And now we have grandchildren. We have become grandparents. And what a blessing it is to have our grandparents. And it is so nice to know that within that time that you established other relationships with other persons whom I value very much. My conclusion is that Stan models who a Jew is. You've heard from many wonderful people today, erudite people. I can only tell you since I started this journey, I don't even know how many countless rabbis I have met with, and I always get a different opinion. What is the status of a crypto Jew? Oh my goodness, you must do this if you're halakhic, or you have to do this or that. And I have met two really fantastic rabbis through Stan, and one was Rabbi Plotkin, and of course the well-known Dr. Angel, and so Mark Angel. And Rabbi Angel is just phenomenal. I've read so many of his books, but the work is there, and when I look at all the different readings I met, it comes down to looking at Psalm 1:3. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that bring forth fruit in his season. And that's how I view you, Stan, with all the work that you have done. If you think Stan's work is just fundamental and a piece of work that can be shelved somewhere on your bookshelf, you're wrong. I am still learning. I'm hoping that in the near future, I can share with you soon about another accomplishment I hope will happen. And at that time, it again comes to Stan's work. So thank you, Stan, for all the work that you have done because you continue to impact my life. I wrote a poem called El Sabio, which means the wise one. And this describes how your efforts have shaped my family, my research, my writing, and my spirituality. This is for you, mi amigo. You model Judaism. El Sabio. In a desolate desert, Iberian exiles scattered beyond the end of the earth. The endless, murky midnight eclipsed 500 years of light. In the apex of Santa Fe, a Jewish sage forged his path with facts, customs, and math. In the tinieblas of his conclusions, Iberian conversos were not illusions. Whiter than infinite noon light, refugees glowed in academic sight, confirmed by scientific DNA might. Brighter than a nearly forgotten flight, Friday night candles restored the night. Luz, 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 Lucid, 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 lights of knowledge exploded. Century of the displaced Anusim, schooled by the Ashkenazim, rooted in the Rio Grande Sephardim. He is like a tree planted in Israel, es nuestro hermano, sabio, fiel.
Thank you both, Linda and Isabelle, for your beautiful words. And I would like now to invite Stan to come over so we can honor you from the bottom of our hearts. In the meantime, let me tell you, the first time I heard Stan was, what remained for me was when he told about the dermatologist who was surprised about having so many people with pemphigus, which is a Jewish disease, in New Mexico, and that was, if I'm correct, one of the ways that you started to research the mystery of the crypto-Jews. So in the name of the Santa Fe Jewish Book Council and all of us here, I would like to present to you the Lifetime Achievement Award for 2017 for your wonderful work. You're an inspiration for all of us. And I'm very, very glad that Isabelle mentioned the trees, because in addition to the plaque, we have also planted 10 trees in your name in Israel. And let those trees grow and many more Jews come back to their Judaism. Mazel tov.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Honoree. I deeply appreciate the award. And to Isabelle, wonderful words, and the poem is very moving. And I thank you beyond words for everything that you've done, not only to help me with my research, but to help other descendants of the conversos from Spain and Portugal too, as they go on their voyage of discovery. And Linda, where are you? I appreciate all the nice things you said, and for some of the other aspects of my somewhat checkered past. Fake news. I could go on and on and on to discuss some of those activities, but I will not impose that discussion this afternoon. In any event, I am very moved by so many of my friends and colleagues and relatives who have made it here today to help honor me today. I'm very touched, and I thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. I would like to extend my deep appreciation to Ron Duncan Hart, to Yehuda and Nurit Pat, and to the Santa Fe Jewish Book Council for bestowing on me this wonderful honor. Not only does this represent recognition by my peers of my historical research over the course of the last decades, but I'm impressed with the courage demonstrated by the Santa Fe Jewish Book Council in selecting for their 2017 Lifetime Achievement Award someone who is an active member of Jewish Voice for Peace, whose political views are not particularly appreciated in certain quarters of the Jewish community. I would also like to thank the Santa Fe Jewish Book Council for the trees planted in my honor in Israel, and to my colleagues of the Albuquerque chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace for donating 6 olive trees to be planted in Palestine, also in my honor. You are all familiar with the old expression, we all stand on the shoulders of those who preceded us. Well, I've had the privilege of standing on the shoulders of two outstanding New Mexico scholars, Professor France Scholes and Professor Richard E. Greenleaf. Professor Scholes taught history at the University of New Mexico from the 1930s through the 1970s. Professor Scholes' groundbreaking work on the history of the Inquisition in 17th century New Mexico has served not only to fill in a significant gap resulting from the destruction of virtually all locally generated documentation during the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, but also brought to the attention of the scholarly community the concern generated by the Franciscan friars over the secret practice of Judaism during the first century of the Spanish colonization of New Mexico. Professor Greenleaf, who was born and raised in Albuquerque, was my mentor in Tulane University's History PhD program and trained me in the essential skills of objective methodology, archival research, and Spanish colonial paleography, which is the art of reading centuries-old handwriting. Professor Greenleaf's many publications on the history of the Mexican Inquisition stand as a model of outstanding scholarship and serve as an inspiration for my work. He's sadly gone now, how many years? 7 years, and we miss him terribly. I would also like to recognize the invaluable contributions of my research associates and colleagues, some of whom are here this afternoon. Richard Salazar, Rob Martinez, Janice Martinez, Martina Wilde Chaparro, Mercedes Lopez Wooten, the late Gerald Gonzalez, and the late Carrie Hertz, all of whom trudged with me and without me from archive to archive in Spain, Portugal, Mexico, France, Italy, Peru, and several of the Caribbean islands in search of documentation that would shed light on the crypto-Jewish experience in the New World. Without their dedication and very hard work, my research would never have seen the light of day. So thank you. Mercedes, could you stand? Thank you. And I'm not sure, I didn't see any of my other trudgers. Well, if you're here, I deeply appreciate your work. I would also like to thank the hundreds of people who reached to me with valuable information concerning their family's Judaic past. Many of you are undoubtedly familiar with my book, To the End of the Earth, A History of the Crypto-Jews of New Mexico, published by the Columbia University Press in 2005. Begin parenthesis, shameless self-promotion. The book is for sale in the lobby, end parenthesis. And the book traces the historical roots of crypto-Jews on the Iberian Peninsula in Mexico and their migration to the far northern frontier of New Mexico to what was considered the end of the earth way up here in New Mexico. I would like to discuss with you this afternoon some of the progress that has been made in furthering our understanding of the crypto-Jewish experience here in New Mexico, not only since publication of my book in 2005, but reaching back to the early 1980s, when I first became aware of the existence of the practice of secret Judaism in our community. We have witnessed a transition from vague anecdotal stories of New Mexico Hispanos lighting candles on Friday night, refraining from eating pork, and engaging in other practices suggestive of a Jewish past, to the publication of anthropological and sociological studies reflecting sophisticated research analyzing how these customs evolved over the past 500 years. Specifically, I refer to the books and articles by David Gitlitz, Shulamith Halevi, the late Tomas Atencio, Annette Fromm, Rabbi David Kunin, Seth Ward, Enrique Lamadrid, Naomi Lapida Shin, and Damian Vergara Wilson. And especially anthropologist Seth Kunin, whose 2009 book, Juggling Identities, Identity and Authenticity Among the Crypto-Jews, broke new ground in analyzing the persistence of such customs. We have witnessed a transition from tentative hypotheses regarding links between early 16th and 17th century expeditions to New Mexico and the participation of crypto-Jews in these ventures, transition from these tentative hypotheses to firm documented evidence of such participation. Let me offer just as 3 examples. Number 1, family connections between Oñate officer Juan de Victoria Carvajal and Nuevo León Converso colony of Luis de Carvajal in northeastern Mexico in the 1580s and 90s. Secondly, we've been able to establish genealogical links between Iberian crypto-Jews and participants in the 1580s expedition to New Mexico conducted by Gaspar Castaño de Sosa and the 1590s expedition of Juan de Oñate. 3, firm indications of crypto-Jewish identity of several 17th century New Mexico colonists, including Juan Griego, Manuel Jorge, Francisco Gomez, and his son Francisco Gomez Robledo, based on Inquisition records from Mexico and New Mexico. We've witnessed a transition in the attitude of the community, both Jewish and Hispano, with regard to the topic of crypto-Judaism. Many Jews express skepticism with regard to the survival of a Jewish consciousness. Everyone wants to be a Jew, they said. It's cool to be Jewish these days. If Hispanos could prove themselves to be Jews, they could be considered white, and consequently they could climb the social ladder in New Mexico. Never mind that whiteness can be established through far safer, more traditional means, such as proving descent from pure old Christian nobility. We have seen a transition from this kind of skepticism to a general acceptance of the historical plausibility, supporting the claims of New Mexico Hispanos of a Jewish heritage. A number of synagogues have established outreach programs to assist those descendants of crypto-Jews who are exploring a relationship with Judaism, including Congregation Nahalat Shalom's Casa Sefarad in Albuquerque, B'nai Zion in El Paso, Sonia Loya's group out of Ruidoso, Texas A&M University Hillel Center, and Temple Beth Shalom here in Santa Fe. These local efforts complement those of such international organizations such as Kulanu, Reconectar, and Amishav, whose mission is to gather the dispersed. The attitude expressed by the Hispano community is more complex. Some have expressed the fear that by recognizing one's crypto-Jewish background, one's Catholic faith would be subject to question. Others expressed the view that we can't be Jews. All Spanish people have always been Catholic. That's, believe it or not. Still others ask the question, what makes today's Chicanos so insecure about their Chicanismo that they have to invent a Jewish past that never existed? We have seen a transition here as well. It is generally recognized today within the New Mexico Hispano community that having Jewish ancestry in no way contradicts the strength of one's Catholic or Protestant faith today. And I'll ask you to remember some of the complementary ideas that were expressed by Professor Graysboard in this direction. Moreover, there is a growing recognition that the concept of all Spanish people are and have been Catholic is historically inaccurate, that prior to the forced conversion of the 1490s, one could be Catholic in Spanish, Muslim in Spanish, or Jewish in Spanish. And with regard to any alleged contradiction between one's Chicanismo and his or her crypto-Jewish background, it is becoming increasingly clear that the two identities are not mutually exclusive. Although the perception within some elements of the politically active Chicano community that most Jews tend to be Zionists interferes with their identification with oppressed people everywhere, including the Palestinians, and tends to keep them in the closet. Among official circles within the Catholic community, we are seeing a transition from not wanting to discuss the issue to embracing the concept. The first major breakthrough came in the first decade of the 21st century, when I was invited to lecture on the topic at the parish of Santa Maria de la Paz here in Santa Fe. Shortly thereafter, Monsignor Jerome Martinez of the Santa Fe Cathedral Basilica invited me to speak at the cathedral's adult education program, followed by a very warm reception on the part of the parish of San Albino in Mesilla, just west of Las Cruces, the vocal artist and Converso descendant Consuelo Luz and myself. And I was very appreciative to receive a letter of introduction by then Archbishop of Santa Fe, Michael Sheehan, to Catholic parish archives in Spain, Mexico, and the Caribbean, requesting that they provide me with access to parish records. And perhaps the biggest breakthrough of all is represented by the offers of the governments of Spain and Portugal of citizenship to all who could prove descent from Sephardic Jews and crypto-Jews. Perhaps the most significant recognition of the phenomenon of crypto-Judaism came last year, when the New Mexico History Museum produced a magnificent exhibition, Fractured Faiths, Spanish Judaism, the Inquisition, New World Identities, curated by Joseph Diaz, Roger Martinez Davila, and Ron Duncan Hart. And Helene, if you're, can you stand up and please be recognized for helping to make that exhibition a reality. Thank you very much. This exhibition featured priceless documents and artifacts from Spain, Mexico, and New Mexico, and received excellent reviews from the scholarly community. And also last year, University of Oklahoma Press published an outstanding book by former New Mexico History Museum Director Fran Levine called Doña Teresa Confronts the Spanish Inquisition, the 17th Century New Mexico Drama. Our research into the history of crypto-Judaism, in whole or in part, stimulated the development of the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies in 1991, the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society in 1985, and the Jewish Genealogical Society of New Mexico in 2014. The Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies produces and/or distributes 3 publications: Halapid, La Granada, which is the online version, and the Journal of Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian Crypto-Jews. The New Mexico Jewish Historical Society publishes a quarterly newsletter, Legacy, and just this year premiered a remarkable film, Challah Rising in the Desert, which includes a significant segment on crypto-Judaism in New Mexico, and that was produced by Mel and Paula Schwartz. Other films inspired largely or partially by our work include Expulsion in Memory, by Associated Producers in 1995, Children of the Inquisition, Lovett Productions, to be released this year. Theater productions include The Merchant of Santa Fe, produced by Ramon Flores, which was a very interesting takeoff on The Merchant of Venice, but set in 17th century New Mexico. Parted Waters, produced by Robert Benjamin. Secret Things, produced by Elaine Romero. Once a Bright Fire, written by the late Rena Down, but never produced. And Beyond Time, written by Carol Lopez and not yet produced. Our research has also served to stimulate many works of fiction on the topic of crypto-Judaism in New Mexico. There are some that accuse me of publishing fiction, but we don't talk about that. Too many to mention here, but those, including those of inspirational poet and author Isabelle Medina Sandoval, who just graced us with her wonderful comments just a moment ago. Mark Talbert, Corinne Brown, Marcia Fine, Sandra Toro, Judith Van Giesen, Trudy Alexi, Michael Ray Baca, Mario Martinez, and graphic novelist Ilan Stavins. Among New Mexico artists whose work has been inspired by the crypto-Jewish experience include Anita Rodriguez, Sonia Loya, Charlie Sanchez, Charlie Carrillo, Naomi Bacapino, Jacobo de la Serna, Diane Breyer, and the late photographer Carrie Hertz. There has also been a very effective adult program called the Rhodes Scholar Program. It used to be called Elder Hostel, right? But those of us who are forever young refuse to acknowledge that we're elders, so the name change took place. And I'd like to acknowledge Norma Libman. Norma, are you here? And Carrie Long, could you please stand up and be recognized? Oh, I'm sorry, Maria Apodaca as well. I'm sorry, could you please stand up and be recognized as well? The transition to acceptance of the historical reality of crypto-Judaism is also represented by a growing awareness within the scientific and medical communities with the discovery of certain diseases and genetic mutations found within the Hispanic community, not only here in New Mexico, but in other parts of the Spanish borderlands in Latin America. Diseases, mutations that are associated with Jewish populations. Foremost among these are the BRCA1 and 2, genetic mutations predictive of breast and ovarian cancer, and the disease pemphigus vulgaris, a potentially fatal dermatological disorder where the cells that hold the skin together no longer function. These phenomena are discussed at length in To the End of the Earth, on sale in the lobby, as well as more recent publications, Abraham's Children, Race, Identity, and the DNA of the Chosen People by John Entine, Jeff Wheelwright's The Wandering Gene and the Indian Princess, Race, Religion, and DNA, and most significantly by Dr. Harry Oster of Yeshiva University Einstein Medical School, a book called Legacy, A Genetic History of the Jewish People. In addition to the medical and genetic work of these individuals, Bennett Greenspan of Family Tree DNA in Houston has been collecting DNA samples from people all over the hemisphere and making some interesting connections linking New Mexico Hispanos genetically to Iberian Jews. But despite all these advances in understanding the phenomenon of crypto-Judaism, challenges still remain. Our historical and anthropological findings continue to be questioned by skeptics within the academic community. But these challenges have forced all of us to be far more careful in our own analyses. One of the lessons I've learned from my colleagues in anthropology and folklore is that objects do not speak for themselves. That simply because one sees a six-pointed star on a cemetery headstone or in a church, the assumption cannot be made that these symbols represent Judaism. Sometimes the six-pointed star is just a six-pointed star. A very easy way to make a star with two opposing triangles. It's a lot easier than trying to figure out how to draw a five-pointed star. Other times it may represent a Star of David. It all depends on the cultural context into which the object is placed. A headstone found in a cemetery in northern New Mexico, dating from 1971, for example, is adorned with a six-pointed star and includes the name of the deceased, both in English and Hebrew, Esther Bat Yosef. The Hebrew letters Pei Nun, meaning here lies, and the Hebrew acronym for May her soul be bound in the bonds of eternal life. I was convinced that this evidence alone was sufficient to prove that this was a Jewish artifact. The folklorist with whom I worked, Annette Fromm, stopped me in my tracks and told me objects do not speak for themselves, that I needed to conduct further investigation before I could arrive at such conclusions. That forced me to track down family members of the deceased in order to ascertain that all-important cultural context. Through the obituary in the local newspaper, I was able to identify and locate the brother of the deceased, who revealed that, indeed, the inscriptions on the headstone were intended to be a reflection of the family's Jewish heritage. Suffice it to say that our critics have helped shape the dialogue and to respond, sometimes in an appropriate manner and other times less so. You know who we're talking about. Leading to a greater understanding of the phenomenon of crypto-Judaism. So, where do we go from here? Sadly, my deteriorating health prevents me from being as active as I would like to be. I would very much like to complete my book on the history of crypto-Jewish settlement on the Spanish Caribbean islands of Cuba, Santo Domingo, Puerto Rico, and pre-British Jamaica. My research associates and I have conducted investigations into all of these islands, as well as in Spain, Mexico, and Peru, and we have collected thousands of photocopies of relevant documents. I am in the process of reviewing this material and hope to make a dent in the narrative before too much time expires or before I expire. I will end my comments here this afternoon with the same words that I used to conclude my standard lecture on the history of crypto-Judaism in New Mexico. People often ask me, and they still ask me, why are you doing this? Sometimes in a curious way, sometimes in a more hostile manner. The answer, of course, is very complex. But at its basic element, those of us who are doing work in this area are interested in finding out who we are as a community. People have firm ideas as to who we are and who they are. Ideas often based on inaccurate stereotypes. All Jews come from Russia, Poland, and Eastern Europe, right? Well, this research demonstrates that the fabric of Jewish heritage and history is much richer and more complex than many people thought. And who are these Hispanos here in the Southwest? A bunch of fanatical Catholics who crossed some border a couple of hundred years ago. Well, this research also demonstrates the shallowness of this prejudicial and inaccurate stereotype, and that the warp and the weft of Hispano culture is far richer and more diverse than we had thought. What we're trying to do with this research is to show who we are as a community, and more importantly, how we got to where we are today. And with that, I thank you. Thank you. I also wanted to acknowledge the immense contribution that my family has made to my research. Helen has been with me for 56. About 50 years we've been together, and she has supported me and with positive contributions to my work, as well as taking care of the kids while I was off gallivanting around in some terribly uncomfortable city and breathing dust and just having a terrible time of it, right? Yeah. And I'd like to introduce my son Paul and my daughter-in-law Melissa, who is and my wonderful grandchildren Cora, Caden, and little Brookie, wherever she is. And with my daughter, Shira, who you all knew here as Melissa, and her wonderful husband, Yoav, and her two children, Raya and Ileana. And they apologize for not being able to make it today. And it's been wonderful having this opportunity to see so many wonderful old friends, people who I have not seen in years and years. Oh, Consuelo, there you are. I mentioned you. Stand up, please. Consuelo Luz. So with that, I thank you all very, very much. And it's been wonderful having this opportunity to see so many wonderful old friends.